Okay, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome all to this, the second Salmon and Trout Conservation UK's Untangled talk. And a few weeks back, we had the great pleasure of tangling with Fergal Sharkey, one of our vice presidents, whose focus on water quality, I suppose, more than anything, has made him something of a hero during these unusual times. Although I would imagine water company bosses and the Environment Agency probably use a number of different words to describe it. Now, if you joined us for that, you will remember me saying at the time that I was rather hoping that more Untangled talks would follow, not just with personalities like tonight's guest, Jack Perks, but also untangling such controversies as salmon farming and the reintroduction of beavers. In fact, just before we came on air, we'd already started on that one again, and I dare say these issues we may brush up against them over the course of the next hour or so, but we will do them in more detail down the line. If you couldn't join us last time, please let me draw attention to the mention, at least online, that these talks could be enjoyed with a glass of wine or whatever to hand. It's not a remark designed to urge further bacchanalian lockdown excess. But more, and I think it's really important actually, but more to serve as a signpost that our untangled conversations should be enjoyed in a spirit of friendship and conviviality, really, that we should always be able to respect our speakers no matter what they say and no matter how much we may disagree with them. I think mutual understanding is really where we're trying to get to wherever possible, rather than lots of people shouting at each other, as one of my former colleagues has found to his cost. And I am drinking a Swedish whiskey, Macmer, and I know you, Jack Perks, are on Talisker, I believe.
I'm enjoying a Talisker Storm, I think, which is quite a nice one.
By way of introduction to Jack, I think rather like Fergal, our first guest, there is something of a sort of single-mindedness to him, both, I suppose, in order to succeed in his sort of photographic and watery adventures. And I think that single-mindedness is probably hard to match. And I suspect I'm not the only one. I was trying to think what the word is, and I came up with that feeling ever so slightly ashamed that no one before Jack had ever really set off to film all 53 or 54 of our British freshwater fishes and succeeded. And I say ashamed because I suppose as many of us tonight are anglers, conservationists, or anglers and conservationists, it just seemed such a huge omission, really, and something that needed doing, and yet something so many of us who profess a love of fishy things couldn't be bothered to do. There are, of course, mitigating circumstances. I mean, who but a total madman would choose to spend their time face down in all manner of water, not just, of course, our crystal chalk streams and even a fining spate river, but paddling about in all manner of man-made filth as well. And I got to meet Jack, I think about 4 years back, I think it was, and it's been a great source of pleasure to see the young man's star rise ever upwards, not just through his own films, books and talks, all of which we shall discuss over this time, but also thanks to his work on shows like Countryfile and Springwatch, which of course are watched by enthusiastic audiences of millions. I don't think, Jack, anyone's really done more to bring the viewing public beneath the surface of our rivers, lakes and waterways than you, because TV normally goes for the sort of brilliance of the barrier reefs or deep blue marine shots and such like. And it's just amazing to me that freshwater has been ignored for so long.
Yeah, it is. It's a funny one, isn't it? I mean, we've got so much variety in life in the UK, whether it's the freshwater fish, the marine fish, and I think I'm preaching to the converted tonight because I realise most people watching this will be interested in fish, but we have got some incredibly beautiful species and environments. And sometimes it's the species that aren't so beautiful and the environments that aren't so beautiful, and showing off the interesting side of those. That's the challenge in it all. And as you mentioned earlier briefly, it's always an uphill struggle trying to get these slimy, brown, boring fish, as many of them would call, on the telly. In fact, weirdly enough, I've just been speaking to Springwatch last week, and we were going to do spawning pike, and then it's just got axed. So they do badgers and blue tits every bloody year, but pike, they were
there does seem to be a real bias towards birds on.
Yeah, but they said, we can't do it because we did pike in 2009, and I was like, okay, so that's what I'm up against. That's what I'm up against with all of this.
Why do you think we are? I mean, I wonder whether just culturally. I know we're interested, I suppose, primarily in game fish. I'm actually interested in everything in our waterways. Now, just whether just historically calling the majority of our fish coarse fish somehow psychologically sets them off as sort of rubbish, waste, garbage, and something that we don't consider special.
Yeah, well, I think coarse fish comes from the coarse taste. I think that's
Yeah,
why we call them coarse, as far as I'm aware. And it is a shame, isn't it, really? Because there's so many. I mean, salmon, and I wouldn't dare knock salmon on a salmon and trout conservation talk, but they're on telly quite. They get a lot of the limelight, and you know they are beautiful fish. But there's, as we said, 53 odd other species that. When's the last time you saw roach on the telly or perch on a nature program? You just don't get to see them, and it's such a shame because they've got these incredible lifestyles and behaviors. And it's like someone saying, I've never filmed a robin on a nest before, this really common bird. And you look at something like a perch or a roach, it's everywhere. And no one's really filmed them, not to a kind of telly standard breeding. It's bonkers. It's crazy. So I'm trying to a degree, right that wrong. It's just taking a while.
it's such a broad question, but I am genuinely interested in sort of the kind of reaction you get. Now, obviously, I've seen you always amongst fishy friends, and there's a lot of knowledge in the room, you know, right up serious academic knowledge in the room very often. But what about amongst the broader public?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's the classic one is, and again, anglers will know this. Like, oh, there's nothing in there. You know, they'll walk by. There's nothing swimming in there, and you're like, well, actually, and you go on to tell them, you know, there's lots living in there. So it's normally positive. I've not had any negative. The best compliment I've ever had was an angler saw some of the stuff that I did on YouTube, and he said, "You've ruined fishing for me because you've taken the mystery out of it." Because obviously, when you're sat there watching your flow, you don't know what's happening. And then he just saw some of my videos, like, "Oh well, I know what's happening now." And I took that as a compliment. I thought that's quite a nice way of looking at it.
And you're not an angler?
No, I am. I am an
You
angler.
are an
No,
angler.
yeah, no, I fly fish, coarse fish, sea fish, noodle, anything to catch fish.
So, what brought you? I mean, what was your initial foray filming underwater? Presumably, you weren't in wetsuit and snorkel the first time you filmed underwater.
No, I would have been actually because
Really?
so my first love was nature, was like catching frogs and all, you know, huckleberry fin basically. And then when I was 11, I got a really cheap fishing rod from Woolworths. I think that's how long ago Woolworths was a thing, and I learned how to fish badly, and I still fish badly to many degrees. Um, and then I thought, well, I want to turn this into a living somehow, working with wildlife and fish and whatnot. And I went down to Cornwall, did a degree in marine and natural history photography. And obviously, because I'm based in Nottingham and there are rivers and whatnot, but we're nowhere near the sea. But Cornwall, you had this amazing coastline. And I bought a wetsuit and I cracked on. I mean, the UK, even in the summer, it's like 15, 16 degrees. It's still pretty chilly. So you could go in your shorts, but I'm certainly not Daniel Craig emerging out of the sea. And no one wants to see that. So no, I get my wetsuit on and it just means I can stay in there a bit longer as well when I'm doing it.
And I'm not going to go down the sort of camera rabbit hole. Obviously, I know what's happened with cameras, but because I know you also work with poles and with remote control cameras and such like. What about your first freshwater photographic venture? Were you in the water for that?
It would have been so I live near the River Trent. If anyone's barbel anglers, I live near Collingham, which is a kind of the barbel mecca of the UK. And there's a little tributary of the Trent called Fareham Brook, and that's where I grew. You know, so near a big council estate in Nottingham. That's where I grew up, and this was the river that I played around with photography. And it was just placing cameras on the bottom, just static cameras, letting them run, and then eventually I did get in there and snorkel, which you know. I never had any trouble, but you can imagine a bunch of chavs from a council estate walking along the river and just seeing someone face down and you say, what are you doing? Looking at fish. It doesn't help your situation particularly.
It is. I mean, it is. It is. Again, there's no logic to it. It's perfectly normal for me to get in a pair of waders to stand in a river, but it's still looking at you doing it. I've been looking at you again this afternoon. It does look very odd. It's strange.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I can't deny that really. But it's an amazing, and to anyone watching, if you've never swam in a river, it's just you. Have you ever snorkeled in the river, Matthew? Have you ever done that before?
Snorkeled. I did. I tend to, in the limited time I've had, I would invariably use it for fishing. But
Yeah.
I do remember a very hot July on the Usk, and it was absolutely pointless fishing during the day. And some people may think this is heresy, but I thought, well, why not enjoy swimming in it? So wife or girlfriend she was at the time, and I was swimming in the river, and I presume it was a sea trout rather than a salmon. But at the moment in time that I saw this huge torpedo-like thing swim underneath me, oh, bloody hell! I had a shock of a lifetime. And the strange disconnection that in my brain, I suppose, I look at rivers still as someone standing. So I suppose as someone who just sees them going by, and it's only when I've got my angling head on that I'm thinking about everything else that's going on there. And I just wonder whether maybe there's an embarrassment factor for us in actually putting our face down in the river and seeing what's there. Wild swimming is still a curiosity to many.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And obviously, again, that's maybe not controversial is the right word, but obviously I know some people would rather not have a half-naked person go through their swim, which I can, understand if you're fishing. But it is, if you get the opportunity, it's phenomenal. It's another world. And I think you get a deeper, without getting too artistic, you get a deeper appreciation of the fish, kind of seeing their point of view in life. So it's amazing. In the summer, don't go in the rivers now, it's miserable. But, in the summer, with the light hitting the bottom, you see the shoals of minnows. And you might, if you're lucky, you might see something bigger a little bit further away. It's an unreal experience.
Do you have to-dos with people? I mean, I've heard some horrible stories of anglers and kayakers. I'm not attributing any blame one way or the other, but people sort of shouting at each other or worse. You're obviously going to be very respectful if other people are using the river, but are people happy to see you?
So the way I normally operate, because I often get asked about permissions, is I wouldn't normally just rock up to a river and jump in, because like you say, that'd be incredibly disrespectful to the angling club or whoever runs the fishery or the river. So I'm lucky that I've built up a good relationship with quite a few river keepers and angling, some great people on the wire like Cressbrook and Lytton, fantastic club, and Pete Farrow I think might be tuning in tonight on Testwood. And that's the best way to do it, is let them know. So I've not really done it by surprise. I'm trying to think. I've not had like a brick lobbed at me, or I've not been caught by a rapala or anything like that in the back of the head just yet. So it's all been pretty positive. But again, I wouldn't just turn up and do it. I'd always seek permission before I do anything like that.
And I know a lot of the work you do are in the more sort of attractive stretches of water, but it's right to say you've been looking at sort of urban rivers as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I say, in Nottingham, it's a pretty urban place, and in fact, so during the second lockdown, normally I go up to the Spey to film spawning salmon each year. It's like a pilgrimage, and stay at Granton-on-Spey, and I film around that area. Beautiful part of the country, but couldn't go because of lockdown, and I was a bit kind of almost depressed, really, because it's something that I normally do and I enjoy. And I thought, well, I'd still like to do salmon and trout, but what can I do locally? And I found salmon on the River Dove in Derbyshire, which is the most inland population of salmon. And it's one of those things where the stars all aligned to just create a couple of days of good conditions. So the water was relatively clear. And I was stood with Tim Jacklin. I'm assuming you know Tim from the Wild Trout Trust. And we were both stood over a bridge, and we were watching this beautiful henfish digging a red, and then a great big cockfish coming in, and they were fertilizing them. And this is less than an hour from my house. And I'm thinking, why am I going all the way to bloody Scotland when this is an hour away? So it is nice. And that's not too far from, where would that be? Not too far from Uttoxeter. So kind of urbanish, So yeah, there are definitely lots in urban rivers. We've just got to look a little bit harder beyond the shopping trolleys.
Well, yeah, I was one of the things I was quite surprised you saying in one of your films was actually the richness of fish life you found in urban streams and urban rivers. And I know we may be drifting away from salmon and trout, but as someone who used to catch gudgeon and almost consider them as sort of garbage fish, I mean, their numbers in the Thames have just plummeted. I mean, absolutely. And it was just fantastic to see them. I'd assumed it would be pollution related, and then it seems that in urban settings that you found loads of gudgeon.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things because a lot of people say, why don't we see rough anymore? Why don't we see gudgeon and mini species? And I think there's not been any formal surveys, as far as I'm aware, as to their decline. I would argue it's probably because there's less people fishing rivers. If you think that when you were fishing when you were younger, there would have been a lot more people on the rivers, whereas now there's fewer. And law of averages, if there's less people there, you're not going to catch as many fish. I also think that because our rivers and I know Fergal will slap me on the back of the head. I've got somewhat cleaner, somewhat. The rivers are clearer, and it means that they're maybe easily predated. So a little gudgeon, they love murky water. That's perfect for a gudgeon. But if a river's clear, then they're a little bit easier to be eaten by perch and pike and all kinds of predators. So that would be my theory anyway. I don't know that 100%.
I had not considered that at all. That is something I will be thinking about for some time to come, that they could be victims of cleaner water.
Yeah.
It strikes me, I'm going to return to pollution in just a bit, but it does strike me that a lot of stuff is very politically charged these days, and feelings run very high on a lot of issues. You seem to pick a very careful course. You're very sort of firm about what your objectives are: conservation, bringing awareness. But you're very you're not banging in people's faces, screaming and shouting.
No, I'm not, and I'm glad you brought that up, actually, Matt. So, I think what Fergal does is phenomenal. I don't know him that well, but I've spoken a couple of times. I think that's great. And one of the main reasons I'm not banging a drum is because I'm a freelance photographer and filmmaker. So essentially, I'll work for anyone that has me. So I have to be very careful about what I say about who. And for example, I'll pick one out of thin air. The Environment Agency are a very good client of mine, and they pay quite well. And I quite like eating and keeping the lights on. So I'm very reluctant to slam any organisation. I'm not necessarily picking that on them, because it might potentially impact my income. So whether that's right or wrong, some people might call that cowardly, but at the minute, I'm not in a position where I can bang the drum too loudly. There are certain subjects which I'm quite passionate about, and I'm not too worried. Again, just general fish conservation on the whole, and bringing barriers down and things like. I think that most weirs should have a stick of dynamite, and we should kind of free flow the rivers. I'm quite happy to bang about that. But other subjects, I'm a little bit more cautious about. So yeah, it's a hard one, because I'm quite happy. When this Zoom call's off, I could probably talk to people, or talk to yourself and Nick, about things that I wouldn't say publicly. But yeah, you have to be careful a little bit.
I completely understand, and I think within the membership there will be an awareness that Fergal can do things as an individual or with other campaign groups that this organisation may not be able to do.
Yeah.
Because it's not just necessarily taking on the bad guys, you've also got to bring the general public with you. And I think regardless of your own situations, having to navigate a career through these sort of difficult waters, you are primarily, in my view, bringing the public with you, the like of which has, towards freshwater interest, the like of which we haven't seen before. So good luck to you on treading the path. I am going to ask you, I'm going around in circles on this in my own head, and we will do a program on it in due course. But was one of our members asked during the Fergal talk, why, broadly speaking, people don't really care about declining numbers of Atlantic salmon, possibly teetering towards extinction. But we are quite happy to put thousands of pounds, hundreds of thousands of pounds, giving, someone said last time, foreign beavers new homes in the UK.
Brexit nightmare, isn't it?
Which is a very cynical line to take. But the bit that I am stuck on was why we're not looking after the things that we have here right now.
Yeah, and again, this is one of those, because I've got my fish and angling hat, and I've got my filming wildlife hat. So it's always interesting when I see these issues, and because I'm often sat on the fence one way or another. I think with salmon, it's a case of predominantly they're out of sight, out of mind, which is a shame, because I think if people could see salmon the way that I see them, and certainly that anglers see them, they perhaps change their viewpoint and grasp just some of the things about its life cycle. That fish has swam from wherever your river is in the UK, possibly off to the coast of Greenland, thousands and thousands of miles. That's remarkable. But then people just think, oh, they go to sea and they come back. It's not, it's underselling it massively. Whereas a beaver, even though the chances of seeing, I've been looking for beavers for careful how I word that. I've been looking for beavers for years, and I've still not seen one. I've been up to the Tay in Scotland. I've been to Devon. I haven't. They're very shy, very very shy, or they can be. So chances are people are getting excited about an animal they'll probably never see. Whereas a beaver, but because it's cute and cuddly and fluffy, that it's easier to kind of see that and get a little bit more enthused about them, perhaps. So it is a shame with them.
Yes, as I said, we're going to return to that subject. Well, hopefully within the next few months, and have someone from the Beaver Trust to talk about it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some fish then. You've said a few times that grayling is your favourite. Is it because, in many ways, you're probably the only person who's managed to get grayling onto the pages of the Daily Mail, other than a certain politician? 50 Shades of Grayling, as I recall, was the headline that followed the filming of the mating antics of the grayling.
Yeah, so that was that's when we met. Well, it's when we met, wasn't I? Showing that presentation, it was on that. So it's about 4 or 5 years ago. And again, Spring Watch mentioning them. They're always reluctant to show fish unless you've got some kind of behaviour. And I was like, look, you've got to do grayling. They're just these incredible fish, beautiful dorsal fin, elaborate courtship. They'll be great. And they were lukewarm to it. It took me 4 years of finding them and filming them. And eventually I got the spot. And they were like, okay, so what else can you do? So we got this shot of them spawning, send it over to them. And they were like, oh, right, okay, can you do that again? I was like, it took 4 years just to get that, but we did it again anyway. And then they shown it on the program. And then the next day, the media just, I don't know, 50 Shades of Grayling. But it's because the female looks like she's having an orgasm. And and if you Google, grayling, be careful where you Google it, but grayling having sex, and they're doing it. But basically, the very boring answer is that she's opening her mouth to allow more oxygen in. So it's not quite as exciting as having a knee tremble. But yeah.
Well, no, this is going to sound a very naive question, possibly, but they're not the shyest of fish. I mean, I'm always amazed how close you can stand to them in a river. Why would it take 4 years to get? I mean, they're amazing shots. I don't know if people have seen you've got shots of 2 males fighting, or 3 males, I think, at one point fighting.
Yeah.
So wonderful footage. But why 4 years? Why did it take so long?
So it's all a case. I mean, rivers, it can be difficult because of clarity. So, for example, the fish might be doing exactly what you want, but it might be a bit murky. The conditions aren't. It's not very sunny. So, in that case, finding the grayling wasn't the problem. That was one of the rare instances where finding the fish wasn't too difficult, but it was waiting for good conditions to film them. A little bit of sun, relatively good water clarity, and a few days of them doing what they were doing. So, some fish are easier than others. But I mean, even though I've been doing this now, 8 years, I've probably only filmed 5 or 6 species actually spawning. So of the 53, I mean, I don't really want to be known as the guy who films fish shagging all the time, but that's one of the best behaviors to be known as some fish pervert, but that's one of the best behaviors to get with them.
I found it's some of the most intriguing things I found was in the Caribbean. It's quite well known that you'll have permit will follow stingrays, and as the stingrays dislodge crabs, the permit dive in and take them. But I had never heard of that kind of behaviour happening with anything in the UK, and yet you had footage. I think you were after barbel, and the barbel rather selfishly decided to reproduce behind the camera. And as I recall, the eggs, their fertilised eggs were washing past, and the grayling were on the shoulders of the barbel.
Yeah, I mean, historically they were persecuted for it, I think, weren't they? And so it probably didn't do them much favours showing that footage off. But yeah, so the grayling were following the barbel because they knew as soon as they spawn, they were going to eat them all. I should just say that it's all kind of swings and roundabouts, because when the grayling spawn, trout and other things eat their eggs as well. So it's not like favoritism, but it makes you realise why fish have thousands of eggs, why that trout lays 10,000 eggs, because 10,000 trout don't survive. I don't know the exact figures, but you can imagine a very small percentage of those are actually going to make it. And as soon as they come out the fish, they're getting eaten. So they've got so much against them. All the odds are stacked against them. So it's a miracle any of them make it, really, when you think about it.
Yeah. Do you think it's? I mean, whether we could call it learned behaviour. You said it. You follow the urban bird, and I know you've spoken to him,
Yeah.
David, and I think you said to him that fish had personalities, which are certainly. Maybe you should explain that a little.
Yeah, no, they do. I mean, and it's funny you say, I'll touch on it very quickly, but you say about learned behavior. Fish do learn. And what you were saying about those permit does happen in the UK, but with eels and perch. So you'll get a large eel that will go, and in fact, I've seen this weirdly with Nick one time, and you'll get a large eel going on the riverbed, and then it'll be flanked by a couple of perch. And when the eel, like that stingray, starts digging around on the bottom, it's disturbing food, and the perch will swim in and steal food from the eel. Now that's learned behavior. That perch wasn't born knowing to do that. It's watched an eel, it's seen it do that, and it knows I can steal food from that. So when it sees a big eel cruising, it knows it's dinner time, which is, a fish has learned something. So they're not these stupid pea-brained things that we necessarily think they are. They can learn, and they are a lot smarter than we give them credit for. And in terms of personalities, they definitely do. I mean, and anglers will know this. If you fish a river constantly, you get to know the fish. And I remember as a kid on that river I mentioned, there was a chub with a massive underbite, and that would be the shyer fish. And there might be a slightly smaller chub that you could just tell because it maybe had a heron stab wound on the back, and that was more confident. So I don't know personalities, but they do. Yeah, no, I'm going to stick with it. I think they do have personalities to a degree.
Genetic or environmental advantages, which we perceive as personalities. The more outgoing fish, maybe more aggressive towards competitors.
Yeah, it's all part of their evolution, isn't it? And getting back there. So I think some traits are going to be more beneficial than others, and maybe being slightly bolder might help fish in some circumstances, and in other cases being shyer might help them. Yes. So yeah, I think so.
Now your search for all of the UK's freshwater species, we're settling on 53. No burbot, would that be right?
Yeah, but it depends who. So I love the idea that there might be a burbot hanging on, and of course I can't definitively say there are none, but I don't think there are any left. I mean, the last one that was recorded officially was like 1969, I think, and we haven't seen one since. So I don't think they're still around. Go on, sorry.
It's spotting in Cambridge or something like that. Vaguely.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, that's right. That's where it was. And historically, we would have found them from Yorkshire, Nottinghamshire, where I am. We would have had them down to around about Norfolk, Essex, Cambridgeshire. So they weren't widely distributed, just across the east of England. And there are talks, weirdly enough, we do mention beavers. There are talks about reintroducing burbot, which again, it's going to need a hell of a PR team because they're ugly-looking buggers. But if we can get a burbot back, I'd love that, because there are species that went extinct in our lifetimes. 1969.
I suppose it becomes quite interesting because there's sort of invasive species that we now are quite relaxed about, and sometimes Zander, nobody seems to give a fig about Zander.
No.
You certainly widened my knowledge of species I didn't know we had. Britling, I think, was one that sticks in mind. The very small
Bitterling.
Bitterling.
Yeah.
In terms of conservation, we spoke briefly last time about how New Zealand has sort of gone trying to go back to a year zero, but they can't do it in the rivers because the introduced trout have eaten or outcompeted all the original species that might be there. What if you could wave a magic wand in the UK, what kind of freshwater environment would you like? Would it be broadly as we have now with a few missing characters?
Oh, that's a really good question.
It's really because it's New Zealand is so strong on back, but in certain respects it cannot do it.
No. I mean, the thing with if we just talk about non-native fish, there aren't any that are widespread and cause major issues at the moment. There was topmouth gudgeon, which are a tiny little non-native fish, but I think we've more or less wiped them out now. The only one I'd be concerned about is Wells catfish, which are these basically a big mouth, a big tadpole looking mouth thing. And I don't really have a problem with them in like private fishing lakes. That's fine. But in rivers, I mean, they'll eat everything. If you look at the Ebro, for example, and many people probably know about these catfish on the Ebro, they get to 200 pounds. They've eaten all the native fish. So the Ebro used to have 5 or 6 different kinds of barbel, more or less all gone now because the catfish have scoffed them. So I wouldn't really want to see those, and they're not common in UK rivers, but they do turn up occasionally. If I could wave my magic wand, then I'd get rid of all the weirs for a start. Let's get all those out. Let's get all the barriers out. Let's get some sturgeon back. I'd love to see sturgeon back in the UK, and obviously clean up the water quality a little bit. I mean, it needs a bit of work, doesn't it? So.
Well, yeah, quite a lot. I mean, it's difficult because I wasn't with you on the journey through that sort of half century plus, but certainly on social media, a lot of us would have been aware of your desperation to get hold of a shad, and that there's a picture of you holding the shad, and it certainly gives me goosebumps seeing it. Was there one particular adventure or hunt that stood out in that adventure?
Yeah. So I mean, weirdly that you say that, it was that one. So just to catch people up if you're not aware, so I'd spent 7 years chasing all these different fish. So at this point, I was borderline going crazy from it, and I was just desperate. You know, Captain Ahab after the Moby Dick. I was desperate to get this shad, and there's only one river in the UK where you can reliably find Alice shad, which I can't say exactly which one, but it's down the southwest. And the fishing club were not on, and this is a good point about me saying I have to be careful about who I align with. The fishing club were not fans of Natural England at all. Putting it mildly, were not fans. And because I had worked in the past on a freelance basis, they were very wary of me. And I had to explain, look, this isn't for them. This is just for me. You've got to let me do this. If I don't get this fish, I'm going to go crazy. You're the only people that can help me. And eventually, they very kindly let me enter the river on their private stretch. And the Environment Agency have a salmon monitoring counter there, and they drain the water down, they get the salmon out, they take a scale and whatever and do all that sort of stuff. And I thought, well, it'd be amazing if a shad went into that because I could actually see it really close up. And I said, oh, you know, how many shad have you had? And he went, we've had 4 in the last 6 years. So I was like, Jesus Christ, okay. So the chances of, the odds were already incredibly low, and lo and behold, they lowered it and they got this whopping great salmon out and a nice sea trout. And the guy's like, oh, what's that? And it was a shad. It was an Alice shad. So you couldn't make it up. And they took the samples and they said, do you want to release it? Because obviously normally I'm filming them, not catching them. And I was like, yeah, I'd love to. So I was able to hold this fish, which was quite emotional, really, and then let it go on its way. And that was just incredible to see. It's one of the rarest fish in the UK. You know,
they presumably, because they're not sort of leapers like salmon, are they? So I'm assuming the weirs are probably their number one enemy here.
Yeah, so historically, they would have been in most rivers. So in the Thames, Tower London, I think there's a road called Shad Road, yeah. So because of shad, so there would have been shad in the Thames. But if they can't leap like salmon, they're useless. They just hit a weir, they'll try and breed, and if it's no good, they'll just circle back round. So that's their number one. And again, all the usual suspects of water quality and et cetera, but that's the main one. So the River Severn and the River Wye have got Twait shad, which are the smaller ones, and they get the odd Alice, but not as many. But yeah, that's the main thing, is the weirs, yeah.
Were you surprised? Were there other species you thought might be easier to get that proved tricky?
I mean, weirdly, barbel were hard. I mean, to say how common they are, and again, living near the Trent, which is full of barbel, they were tricky, but that was more finding a river that was clear and had good numbers. So again, it comes down to finding the fish wasn't the issue. It was the actual filming that was the issue. But I mean, I got most of them within the first year. I think I got 45 in the first year. So I was like, oh, this is dead easy. And it took another 6 years to get the rest of them. But it was just about finding the right people who were working on it and knew where to find them and all that. So I built up a huge list of contacts and very talented fishing clubs and fishery biologists and all that kind of stuff who kind of were my informant. I felt like a mafia boss of fish. Like they were informing me when, oh, there's a sea lamprey here now, you need to get down here. And I'd literally leave the next, if someone texts me saying there's fish there, I'd leave the next day because you can't wait a week. The fish isn't going to hang around for you. So it was a crazy few years, really.
I find that really, I mean, we've obviously met a few of the same people in common, but it's quite nice to hear that someone comes up with a freelance venture coming from the right place, and we collectively, all the different groups, broadly get together and help. I think that's a really heartening thing to hear.
Yeah, everyone was, the Salmon and Trout Conservation, Wild Trout Trust, Sustainable Eel Group, the list goes on and on. They were absolutely fantastic. Everyone was really, really great in helping me do that. So, yeah, I can't fault them.
Yeah, it was a shot. I think it was on the Trent, so it may have been more recent, one of your more recent films. And I think you were doing a thing about how it was. I'm sure it was on the Trent, and it was you caught it at a fish pass, and as you got some underwater shots of it as well, and it was exhausted.
Yeah,
and I found it really, really sad because I was amazed, quite frankly, that it had got there and was even giving it a go. And I wanted to know whether you did give it a hand, whether you attempted to give it a hand, and whether you could tell us if you had, because I know some wildlife camera operators are very strict about not intervening at all.
Yeah. So no, I didn't help. It got up on its own actually, which was very good of it. So it didn't need me. But yeah, and this is one of the reasons why I bang on about barriers to fish migration. So on the Trent, coincidentally, I'm on the Trent Rivers Trust as a trustee, so I know a fair amount about it. But there are 9 weirs on the Trent, and all of them are passable by salmon, but none of them are easy access for salmon. So they can get up, but they have to really go for it. And if you think about it, if they've travelled, I mean, how long's the Trent? I mean, a couple of 100 odd miles plus easy. It's a long river. If they're absolutely exhausted before they've even got to their headwaters to spawn, then the odds are so against them. So it's a case of, and to be fair, there are plans, Trent Gateway project, to kind of rectify this and allow much freer passage for salmon to get up above these weirs, but it does take the energy out. And the footage you're referring to, it was a cockfish in the fish pass, but it was barely moving. It was knackered. It was already in its full breeding colours, which it shouldn't. It should be at that when it's up there, not when it's still in the tidal stretch of the river. So it's quite sad to see, really.
You had it on a sort of just almost lying on the vertical of the fish pass and then underwater.
Yeah.
In the underwater shot, it's just a horrible thing to see. It's the first time I've ever seen a sort of fish. It was more like a sort of sack of spuds, really. It just bashed onto the sort of concrete on the bottom. It was struggling to even sort of hold itself in the water. It was a horrible thing to see. So I'm very glad it did get up the pass. Where are you in terms of? I mean, I know people ask you all the time whether you bait up, and I know that's something that you don't do. Would you intervene in nature, separate things from fighting, or help somebody up a fish pass?
It depends. So the classic example is, I don't know if you remember, there was a program called Dynasties, and there was the camera crew who helped the penguins. Do you remember that at all? And so I know the guy who did that, and he was just saying that, yeah, typically you don't interfere, but there are some points where you sort of feel have to. So, I mean, if something was fighting, I'd leave it to it. That's just nature. But I would be, if that salmon had kind of came my way and there was an opportunity to just go, off you go, I probably would have helped it out. I mean, it's got another 8 weirs to go up, to be fair. So if I can help it up past 1, that's great for me. So as a rule of thumb, I try not to interfere. But you can't help but just your heartstrings pull a little bit every now and again.
I'm glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. Now there's another image of yours which also stayed with me, and also for the wrong reason. It was a still image, and if I remember right, a caddisfly, quite a large caddisfly, with a piece of it was either pink or blue plastic stuck in its body case. And I think you were working for Greenpeace at the time, filming plastic pollution. What did you see? What was your take on it? I know you'd like to see the positives. What did you see?
Yeah. I mean, plastics have become a massive issue, haven't they, in the last few years, or we're more aware of it. I mean, it's been around longer than that. And that was on my local river, weirdly enough. So I always thought, well, I don't see much plastic, so we're not going to find anything. But we were looking for microplastics, and this obviously, over time, it degrades into the riverbed. And we were just looking around. We found the odd piece, but it was when we did a riverfly sample, and we pulled out this caddis, and then we saw this blue, and I thought, well, that's not, you don't get blue stone, so what the hell is this? And it was of a bottle or something like that. But then it gets the mind thinking, like, okay, so there's that caddis there, and then a trout eats that. And how many caddis does that trout eat? And that plastic builds up in the trout, which isn't going to be doing the trout any favors. And then, for argument's sake, let's say a heron eats that trout, and then it eats a few more trout, and all that plastic's building up in that bird. So it very quickly becomes quite a big problem, because we think, oh, they degrade, they go away, but they don't go away. They just get smaller and smaller and build up. So it is a major issue, but it's, again, like fish, out of sight, out of mind. A lot of us don't get to see the problem. I think you don't see it as often now, and maybe that's because we're slightly more aware of it. But I remember as a kid, you'd see these rafts of plastic on the river, like just because people were just lobbing it in, or normally after a flood. And I don't see that as often as I used to. It still does happen, but not nearly as much, because I think we're a little bit more aware of it. But
I would kind of broadly agree with you until I sort of got to this coronavirus lockdown. And in the summer, I was fishing on Dartmoor quite a bit, and I was just astonished by how much crap people were prepared to take from their cars and walk a little bit beyond the car park before having their picnic, and then just walking away and leaving it all. And I was just coming across one picnic site after another, and I did that sort of got a bit on top of me, actually. I found it really quite depressing. But again, you are of the mind that you think things are broadly improving with plastic.
Well, for the bigger plastic,
more mindful. We're becoming
yeah. People are certainly more mindful, and I think the bigger plastics we are. But I mean, how do you get rid of millions of tiny? I don't have, whether there's a scientific way, I don't know. I'm not aware of it, but I think we're more aware of it. But whether we're solving the problem at the moment, I don't know.
What about I'm thinking of this question in sort of two levels, really. The less visible, or indeed invisible, poisons. A lot's been said about sewage.
Yeah.
I mean, I can remember when David Walliams did his swim down the Thames, and I watched one morning, he was vomiting before he got in the river, and I thought, well, there's a man made of the right stuff. I'm thinking of both you as a person swimming around, and it doesn't seem particularly appealing, having seen David Walliams chuck his guts up, but also the broader impact of invisible poisons on our watery environments.
So touch wood, I've never got ill from going in a river, but I do make sure that if I've got a cut or anything like that, it's covered, and I try not to drink too much of it if I can help it. But there are certain rivers I would not fancy, like the lower Thames or the lower reaches of most rivers, really. I try not to gulp too much of that. But in terms of like the invisible chemicals, then it is a huge issue. There's so much, whether it's sewage, whether it's road runoff, there's the whole cocktail of disgusting detergents and things entering our rivers. And often, sometimes it can be very sudden. Sometimes you get those instant kills. And often that's quite good for rallying, not good for the river. That can be good for rallying the public. Because if someone sees a river with loads of dead fish, then that makes them care a little bit more. But it's often the slow death. So it's when, say, for example, you might get agricultural runoff, which chokes up the gravels with algae. So that stops the trout spawning. So the big trout are okay. They can carry on living, but they can't spawn very well. So the big trout stay, but you're not getting that recruitment. You're not getting any smaller trout. So in the next 5 to 10 years, the fishing goes down and down, or the fish numbers go down and down. And people are, I wonder why this is. And often it's the slow decline because of the amount of chemicals and nasty stuff entering the river.
Do you have are you optimistic on that front? I mean, I don't think anybody can rightfully claim they have any idea where we're going to be in 10 years at the moment. I mean, we don't even know what the Environment Bill is going to contain because it's been withdrawn.
Yeah.
Are you? I mean, I've been broadly Brexit cynical, but I do see. I suppose I see opportunity because it's a resetting, a recalibration, and for NGOs and interest groups, there's everything to fight for. But the broader impact on the environment, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I mean, I try to be an optimist, but often I end up being a realist. So I would love our rivers to be in a better position in 10 years' time, but just looking at the trend so far, it's not encouraging, is it? So I think that with more pressure from groups to other groups, that is always a good thing to try and sort the rivers out if we can. I think in terms of the public, or certainly the public who use rivers, we're well aware of the problems. And as you were saying earlier, it's maybe getting the message out to a wider audience, like someone who's walking along the river who maybe doesn't care about what's living in there. It's getting them to care, which is the problem at the end of the day. So I'd like to think we'll be in a better place. Hopefully, like you mentioned, the environment bill at the minute isn't, might looking like it's getting scrapped, but we might do something better. Who knows? So I try and remain an optimist.
Okay. Let's talk about your next project then. Britain's Hidden Fishes, I believe, is the title. You've been doing very well on the fundraising. I'll doff my hat to you, because it's not the easiest of times to be going around asking people for money.
No, it is not.
What are you aiming to do with this film?
So Britain's Hidden Fishes is a crowdfunded film, and the idea is to make a Blue Planet style film on UK fish, because again, like I explained with the Watchers and whatever, and the BBC and other programs, fish just take a back seat and they're just seen as protein for other things, when really they're incredible in their own right. And I've been banging on TV's door for years to try and get them to fund it. They weren't interested. So it was a case of, if you want something done, do it yourself. So
sorry, I feel I'm remiss, because it's a couple of times it's come up now. And I don't want to lay this at any producer or executive producer, but just generally,
yeah.
What is it about freshwater fish that they're not interested in? What is it that why doesn't it excite them?
You know what? I mean, I ask myself that every day, Matt. I think it's because maybe it's seen that fish are for the anglers. That's fishermen like the fish are for the anglers, so leave it to them. And unless the fish is doing something really, really remarkable, like the salmon migration or something like that, it does get a little bit untouched. There is the practical point, of course, that they're hard. They're difficult to film. They're not easy. You can film a bird in your garden. Most of us aren't going to be able to film a salmon in our garden. So they are tricky. They're not easy to get footage of. So I think there's a multitude of reasons as to why, maybe. But and again, there's that misconception they're a little bit boring. And that's partly what driven me to, I say, try and start this film, Britain's Hidden Fishes, because I want to show that they're not boring. They have got all these incredible behaviors and colors. We've got some really colorful fish. We've got coral reefs in the UK. All these amazing things that people just are not aware is on our doorstep. So it just kind of fueled me to do this.
So we're going, it's not just going to be fresh, it's going to be all around the UK, coastal as well?
There's going to be some marine in there as well, just for variety, really, because I've not done a lot of marine. So I'd love to do basking sharks and blue sharks and things like that. I mean, the one I'd love to do is tuna, because we've got bluefin tuna in the UK now, which have only come back in the last 20 years. And these tuna are bigger than a car. They're absolutely enormous. And that's swimming off Cornwall. And people think of tuna as, middle of the ocean, miles away, but they're swimming off Cornwall. So that's got to be worth a go.
In terms of, knowing how hard it was to get the behaviour you wanted from grayling, how long is it going to take you to make this film? So
I'm not working on my own, is what I should say.
Okay.
So obviously that was me on my Todd, whereas I've got other camera ops, some people I know at the BBC who are friends of camera operators and whatever. So there's a whole team working on it. I already know what I'm doing and I know where I'm doing it. It was before I didn't know the sort of things like that. So it's all kind of planned and mapped out to get all that. But we're aiming for 2 years filming, and then hopefully release it. So Jeremy Wade, I'm sure people know him from River Monsters. He's narrating it. I've got a composer doing original music. I'm doing some of the filming, but I'll mostly do a production role on this. And then I've got lots of friends who are drone pilots, and I'm trying to give it a cinematic feel, basically on a much smaller budget. Blue Planet.
I was going to say, I wouldn't want to guess at the budget for Blue Planet, but I would imagine it's probably nudging way over 7 figures. I would think, and you're
about 2 million per episode.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
What are you aiming to do your film with?
30 grand, which sounds like a lot of money, but it's really not.
Television, no.
But we're on. Last time I checked, we're on 18,000 at the moment, and I've got 20 days to finish it off, I think, or maybe a little bit more than 20 days. So,
what happens? What happens if you don't make it?
It's all or nothing, because you can't do this sort of thing half-assed. So I've decided if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it properly. So if we don't get the money, it's not happening. But I'm not worried just yet.
There's a few hundred people I would like to suggest that have an interest in at least some of the subject matter you're going to be covering, watching right now. What would you like to tell them, Jack?
Well, I don't want to sound like a beggar too much, but have a look at the project, give what you can. You can donate as little as you want, but if any of you like this tonight and you want to get me a beer, just put it in there. Give me £3 or £4 or whatever for a beer. Just chuck it in there. Some of it as well is there's rewards on offer. So we've got things like you can go fishing with Chris Yates. He's done an auction, the carp angler. There's prints on offer, all kinds of stuff on there. So some people just donate for the pleasure of it, but there are things to get for your money as well. And this is a once in a lifetime thing. I don't think anything like this will ever happen again. And I think this is honestly the only way it would happen. The film is going to be available for everyone to watch. Once the film's done, I'm allowing anyone to watch it. I don't want to limit people who can see that. So it's an investment for everyone to enthuse them about fish. And obviously that's why I'm incredibly proud to have Salmon and Trout Conservation as the main sponsor. They've kind of helped out with it massively. So I'm pleased to have them on board with it.
Can I I've got to ask this now. How do you get close to a sea trout with a camera? Because it's hard enough to walk past them without them being aware of. During the day, I just was that one where, because I know you don't always go in. Sometimes it's remote cameras and such.
Yeah. It depends. So I have been in the water with sea trout. Each river is different. Like some fish, you can go in one river one day and they'll happily swim around you, and you can go in the same river the next day and they're off. So sea trout are known to be really spooky. When I've scuba dived in rivers, I've had it where I've had a big shoal of trout and they just sit there in amongst the boulders, and you can go right up to them. They're not too fussed, but maybe that's because they're in deeper water. They feel a little bit safer. If they are really spooky, then it's using remote cameras, like you say, like static cameras or a pole camera. But yeah, sea trout they are very spooky fish, aren't they?
I just wanted to check that there's not some magic ingredient that you've got that we don't have that you're keeping to yourself.
Well, there is, but I'm not telling you.
And what about the? I've been fascinated by ferox simply because I don't have the geography to be close to doing it. I don't have the time, and clearly the people that dedicate themselves to ferox dedicate a lot of time to it. What attraction do they hold to you?
So ferox, if we do the film, they're going to be in Britain's Hidden Fishes. I really want to do ferox because they are the Loch Ness Monster. They're the real Loch Ness Monster. They, for those that don't know, ferox are brown trout that basically eat their siblings and get enormous by eating protein. So you can get, I think they nudge 20 pounds, some of them. These are big, wild fish, and they basically fill the niche of pike. So they've got big, sharp teeth. They're eating fish. And for most of the time, they spend it deep down in the loch, but they'll enter small tributaries of lochs to spawn in the autumn. And Chris Conroy, who does some phenomenal salmon work up on the Ness, I've been out with him before, and we've seen ferox in these tiny rivers, and they're just beasts because they're bulky. Like you can tell the difference between a salmon and a ferox because ferox look mean. They're just big, bulky things.
Well, that's got to be worth a few quid of anybody's money to see that. And then I'm going to round up. I don't want it to end on a downer, but I was aware from you talking to the urban birder, and I suppose it stands to reason that it's not always the easiest job to do what you do. And I was really, really kind of taken aback by you describing, because there are things we just forget about. We just want to see the pretty fish. We forget about the man hours and the difficulties, the physical hardships that go on, and the mental hardships. And I think, you've been very praiseworthy of your partner in other interviews, and you've also talked about the stresses and strains of chasing fish all around the country on you. Physically, first of all, I know you nearly cut your top of your thumb off, I think, on your shutter thumb as well. Or finger, is it working?
Yeah, it is now. So for a very long time, I couldn't bend my finger more than that, whereas now I've just about got it back. So it was my fault. I was adjusting the camera with a penknife. I wouldn't recommend that. And the knife slipped and it cut the end of my finger off. And, like you see those comedy sketches and it's like, it was like that. Oh, God, that's not good. So I got to A&E and they sewed it back on. And then I went to the pub after, actually, weirdly enough, to self-medicate. But yeah, so there's physical tolls, and I've got not to go through my medical rap sheet, but I've got joint problems as well. So there is that, but there is a mental toll to it, and it does take, you doubt yourself, you think about, am I doing the right thing? Does anyone care what I'm doing? But I think as soon as I'm by that river, that all kind of washes, if you excuse the pun, washes away. And it's just amazing to be by there. So it can be a problem, but it's not something. I'm pretty healthy on that front, but every now and again, these things seep in, don't they?
How much time do you spend? I'm not this year, obviously, with coronavirus, but in a typical year, how much time are you spending out and about chasing fish?
Oh, I mean, I'm away a lot. I work away normally. So Corona was a weird one because it's the most time I've spent at home for a hell of a long time. So I'm nearly. My missus compares me to like a cat because I'm just out the door all the time. Just can't come back when I want feeding. But but oh, so a typical week I might be away 4 days, not necessarily away from home, but I'll be out all day filming. So I'm most of the year I'm in a river. I'm surprised I've not got gills at this point. The amount of time I'm ducking and diving in rivers.
Well, I tell you what, Jack, I know I'm not alone in saying that I'm extremely grateful to you for the work and effort you put in, and the results are just outstanding. And I'd urge anybody watching today, if they haven't already been to your website, to check it out. Because and you mentioned it yourself, you do fish, but you do everything else in between, and there's some startling other wildlife photos to be seen. I think one of a seal, I think, which looks particularly loads of teeth, just wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Thank you for giving up your time this evening, sharing your thoughts. It's really interesting to hear how you have to navigate your path through the different organisations and bodies, as lots of other interested individuals will have to do as well. And well done for doing it the way you do it. And here's to Britain's hidden fishes. I truly hope it makes its target and we get to see it in a couple of years. Jack Perch, thank you very much. You've been untangled.
Cheers. Thanks, Matt. It's always, I've just cheekily posted the link there. So if anyone wants to have a look, it's on there. But yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Always nice to chat about fish. And thanks to everyone for joining me tonight as well. So yeah, cheers.
Chin chin.